And really what I found is that just putting resources out there, it's a waste of money and it's a waste of time, because if you think about it from the end user's perspective.
Buck,
Yes.
Thank you for reconnecting, man. We should do this more often, because I always love to pick your brain for what's going on. I did some stuff here recently, a white paper on, let's say, financial action, right? What creates financial action? But I wanted to back up a second here, because you started as a journalist. So this is in your blood.
Yeah.
We have some similarities. We worked at credit unions. We are both financial wellness enthusiasts. I just thought maybe you could paint the picture a little bit, back up how you got started into this, and what brings you to this level of interest in financial action and wellness.
Yeah. So thanks. First of all, thanks for having me.
I'm having you online. If you were here locally, Buck, I'd pour you a cool drink too, or something like that.
Yeah. When I lived in San Francisco before, I worked at the stock exchange, and which was fine. Really didn't feel like I was helping anyone. I was just making rich people richer, which there's a place for that, but it wasn't really fulfilling work for me. And so I started looking around and ended up getting a job at this company called Balance, which partners with credit unions to do financial education and counseling and that sort of thing. Really loved that work. I started doing it in 2008 in the heart of the financial crisis at that time. And so it was really challenging. There's a lot of people who were calling in and saying, hey, I'm trying to save my home. I'm trying to avoid bankruptcy. I'm trying to keep my family from having to move in with relatives or who knows what. And so that's really what ignited the passion for me, is seeing the impact that helping people with their finances can have on not just the money aspect of their life, but their whole life. And having those conversations with people where I always say they were 45-minute calls, and to listen to the person's voice at the beginning of the call, and then at the end of the call, when you could hear the relief, you could hear that they had some hope for the future. To be able to do that in just 45 minutes, that was a powerful thing. And so I knew at that point that's something I wanted to do long term. I wanted to invest in as far as my career went. And so I worked at Balance for about 7 years and went into a content role there. Eventually made my way to BCU, which you're very familiar with, and started off in a content role there, doing a lot within financial wellness, but then moved into running the education program there, which is called Life Money U. And that was really a dream, because I had all these ideas for what I felt like the optimal financial wellness program would look like. And I had the good fortune to be given that opportunity at BCU, where they already had some things in place. They already had some workshops and some educational content in place. But it was so great because I had the opportunity to, I created the financial coaching department there. Even though it wasn't really a department, it was kind of just taking the existing resources and getting people certified as financial coaches and having them have those same conversations that they'd already been having with the credit union members, but then be able to take it to that next level of say, okay, you're dealing with this situation. Let me give you some personalized guidance for how you can really achieve the dreams that you have. And so that was something I was really happy to have the chance to work on, really proud of. And so that was what really solidified that love of financial wellness, that love of helping people, of giving them the tools that they need.
Yeah, absolutely. And obviously we've got a similar background in some credit union work. I worked in a very large bank for a while. What I noticed is that you started to go and look at, I guess what I would say is what really works. This is something that I'm curious, what made you want to tackle this topic or answer this type of question for financial wellness?
Yeah, really, it was twofold. The first was, I always want to make sure that I'm working on things that are going to generate positive results for people. I think that there can be a tendency to look at, what's the latest, greatest tool? What's the fancy technology? What's the latest technique that's out there? And so I just felt like it's a good thing periodically to just do the research, see what's really happening. And so that going forward, that's the second part of it, is going forward, I wanted to be able to take that information, and then I'd love to work with a credit union, a QSO, a fintech, a nonprofit, and say, okay, now that we know this, let's put that into practice and let's build something that's really going to generate results for people. Because at the end of the day, that's why I'm in this, because I want people to have an emergency savings. I want them to have access to credit. I want them to be able to achieve whatever their dreams are within financial wellness. And that was really my motivation, to say, I want to make sure, because I'm having these conversations with people and I don't want to be relying on outdated information, or I don't want to just be speculating. I want to be able to say, look, here's what the data shows. It's not ambiguous. We can actually say that this particular nonprofit, for example, did this and it worked. And so that's what the information I wanted to have as I move forward in my career.
So let's start at the beginning. I think a lot of institutions, not just credit unions, but big banks, the financial institutions and agencies and charities kind of work on intuition. Hey, we think this is a gap. We think this is what people need. Hey, if someone is overspending, let's provide them some information on why overspending is bad or something like this. It's kind of what I call financial wellness 1.0. It was the very, very early stages of financial wellness programs, but address this because this is still pervasive out there and produces mixed results. What's the analysis say of these types of programs?
Yeah, there are a lot of people who still think in terms of, well, let's put a library of resources out there. My research and my experience both have revealed that you're never going to get the kind of personalization that you need with just a library of resources, because you can't get that granular. You can't put everybody into a very sort of simple box. People might be in this category in this area of their financial life. They might be in a different box in this other category. And really what I found is that just putting resources out there, it's a waste of money. And it's a waste of time, because if you think about it from the end user's perspective,
that's a pretty hot take, Buck, because a lot of companies want to check that box and say they have something from a financial literacy or educational standpoint, and they want to put that out there to go on a limb. And I'm with you. I'm 100% with you here. But to just do that and check that box, that do that, right?
Yeah, exactly. And it is just checking a box, like you say. And some organizations, some companies are fine with that. But if you look at the results, what are you really getting out of that? How are you impacting people? And that's why I try to go into this research process completely clean slate, not have any preconceived notions. Let's consider everything that people are doing. And really, the results just aren't there. You look like Anna Maria Lusardi at Stanford, Richard Thaler, some of these other people who are at the pinnacle of that research. They're just saying like that financial education 1.0, it just doesn't work. It's not catered enough to people's particular situations. And let's look at it from the perspective of a bank, a credit union, someone else concerned about financial wellness. Why would someone look for that information when it's on Google? Why would they dig through a list of videos, articles, resources when they could just Google it and find it that quickly? Where we're at now, people want answers now. So even just from the perspective of trying to drive people there to those resources, that's pretty tough too. So you're spending money on these resources that people may not even be going to. But the other thing too is that, and this is with the research that I did, really what I found is that financial coaching is the better alternative, because you can sit down with somebody, look at their situation. When you have someone who's trained in doing financial coaching, has that knowledge, they can come away from that and give people a customized plan, an action plan to say, here's 5 things that you need to do to achieve those goals that we talked about. Whereas if you go online and you're looking, you're going to get a whole bunch of different advice. It's not going to be catered to that person. Like when I was at BCU, that was one of the reasons why I was such a big proponent of doing financial coaching. The service population is so varied there. You have people who are top executives at Fortune 500 companies. You have people who are just starting out, just out of college. And it's like, you can't put out resources that are going to speak to those people's situations. There's so many different dynamics going on with families, with income levels, with all these different factors. And yeah, that's really why I'm not such a big fan of that 1.0 approach of just saying, let's just throw a bunch of resources out there. I just don't see that being able to really drive home what that particular person needs.
And to shout out BCUA a little bit here, I'm familiar with them. They're local here to where I live, a great credit union. But to your point, what makes them even, I think, a little more unique is how different the population that they serve can be, because they work with SEGs, large companies, and then go into those companies. And now you can have executives that make millions of dollars a year, all the way to frontline employees that are making maybe minimum wage. And so you might have all those people banking at the same place and very different types of clientele. Whereas some credit unions might focus on a particular labor union or just teachers or something like that, where maybe the population is a little more homogenous. Some of the things that they have that work with one person can work with someone else a little bit better. Especially in the BCU world, they have that additional challenge of maybe people not looking like other audiences as much as other organizations do. They have that additional problem. The other thing I wanted to ask you, you mentioned financial coaching. I'm familiar with that a little bit. myself here, but you also write about some of the different levels of service or that interactive piece of the financial programs, counseling, coaching. I don't think you necessarily mentioned advising, but a lot of credit unions might have people in these different spaces, certainly broker or bank tellers. Can you explain to me maybe what financial coaching is or how does that play in? Because you talked about building financial coaching within BCU using their existing personnel. That was a kind of a unique way of having that synergy, but I don't know that a lot of people can think about that because they say, hey, we do have a wealth advisor group and we have financial advisors over here. I do have bank tellers and they're trained on trying to fix problems. What's maybe the differences?
Yeah, I think they're pretty significantly different. First off, I'll draw the line between counseling and coaching. Financial counseling, typically what we're looking at there is, in most cases, a crisis situation, or there's a huge amount of debt. There's maybe a looming bankruptcy. Maybe they're trying to keep their home. So it's something where there is a pressing issue that needs immediate care, immediate attention. And that's the financial counseling where it's more, okay, in the next 3 months, I need to do this to achieve this short-term outcome. Whereas coaching is more goal-oriented. And that's something that I was big at BCU on. The way to personalize it is, first off, let's talk about what your goals are. Because relating it back to that, what we're talking about with financial education 1.0, so much of that is one size fits all. There's a right way to do everything. You should buy a house by the time you're 25. You should be spending this percentage of your income on this area. And with the coaching, it's really saying, okay, let's set all that aside. And the first questions are, what are your goals? What do you want to achieve? Don't worry about what people say you're supposed to be achieving by this age or what the proper thing to be doing is. Let's set that aside. What do you really want? And so financial coaching is all about how do we get that person to that place? How do we give them some actionable steps that they can take? And again, that's why I mentioned the action plan before. Let's give you 5 things. Let's give people 5 things that they can do to get closer to that goal. But then also it's providing a partnership with that person. So instead of like just saying, okay, here's the advice, you're on your own. It's saying, let's check in. Let's see if by this particular date, you can get these first 2 steps done. Or first 3 or whatever it is. So it's really trying to create a framework for people to move towards their goals in a way that feels manageable for them. I think, again, it's not about dictating to people what they should be doing. Do you feel like this particular approach is realistic for you? So it's really creating that framework and then partnership, just partnering with them and saying, okay, let's check in. And if something comes up, give me a call. And so it's more of an ongoing thing instead of just that one direction of the past where it's just, okay, we're going to give you this information, do with it what you will. With coaching, it's trying to help really guide them to what they're looking to achieve. And then the advising piece of it, that can be a part of it too. Because a lot of times like people are thinking about, I want to save more for retirement or I'm looking to buy a house. So that's a separate piece of it, but that could also be potentially a part of it as well to say, okay, you need to invest to get to these goals that you want to achieve. And we can have you talk with someone who's more in that area of financial advising.
Financial literacy, financial education does not necessarily work. Financial coaching does work. How do we know that outcomes with just the education piece aren't necessarily impressive? What did you see that turned you on to the idea of being much more impactful on a real basis for people than just providing information?
Yeah, I bring up a great point because I do think if you look at the statistics, one of the things that came up when I was looking at just and I try to draw the line between financial education and then what I call financial empowerment, because I think education just has the connotation that you're just putting resources out there for people, courses, articles, videos, podcasts. There isn't the data there to show that any of that works. I remember seeing one research study that said that pretty much everything is forgotten within 6 months. People just don't retain the information. So that's another reason why I think coaching works better, because you have a person that is a resource for you where if you do forget something, you can check back in with them or they can remind you or something like that. But yeah, it just seems like with that education approach, no one has really been able to consistently draw a line between this person got this education and then they achieved this positive outcome. I think a lot of times what was happening is, and this is something that I did in my past within financial wellness, is I'd say, oh, we got these people to take this number of courses because they would take a quiz before taking the course and then a quiz after the course. And you could point to the fact that, oh, their knowledge level increased by 30% just by taking this course. Okay, that's great. But then nobody's been able to say that knowledge gain turned into this result in the real world. No one's been able to say, these people got this education and then they now have $500 more in savings on average. Whereas if you look at some of the studies that have been conducted on financial coaching, those results are there. There are increases in savings. There are reductions in debt. You do see credit scores going up. So yeah, to me, that's the difference. And I know a lot of credit unions, there's not a lot of extra money to spend. So can you really spend money on something that isn't pointing toward results? Because I think the big selling point here is saying, if we have these people going through this process and at the end of it, we have more people who are eligible for a loan or can open a credit card or can buy a home or can buy a car through us. I want it to be about people being financially well and having less stress in their life and more opportunities. But for a credit union, for a bank, I get it. There has to be some kind of justification for that. There has to be some return on that investment. And I think if you have a larger pool of people to lend to, you can say that healthier people are better in position to borrow money and open credit cards and do all those things that credit unions or banks want them to do.
Do you think not just credit unions, but financial institutions, lending institutions, banks, the whole 9 yards, the people that are doing the financial literacy education, the online courses, maybe aren't providing financial coaching, or you're telling me that people are saving more, raising credit scores? I certainly see that in financial counseling as well. But when people are working with people and then we see these things actually happen, knowing that they're expensive, do those organizations, those financial organizations have to have a little bit of come to Jesus, let's get real, let's be honest with ourselves, what we're trying to do? Because I hear a lot of organizations say, hey, we're a financial wellness organization or a financial health organization. But then when it comes down to it, it's really moving product. And how much do they have to internalize what they're saying as opposed to just saying it and really make it part of their culture and their mission to be able to, probably invest in some of the things that you're talking about that actually do work and do provide change for people?
Yeah. I think that if you look at a lot of financial institutions, their mission statement, it's already in there. They're already talking about financial wellness. They're already talking about empowering people. And one of the points I always try to get across is this isn't asking financial institutions to do something drastically different. They already have frontline people who are having conversations with people. I think in terms of a credit union, let's say someone applies for a car loan with them. I think what's happened a lot of times in the past is the credit union or the bank reaches out to say, sorry, we couldn't approve you for the car loan because your credit score is at this level. And then the conversation just ends there. What I've encouraged people to do is let's have that ability to keep that conversation going a little bit, to say, your credit score is here right now. For you to qualify for this car loan, we need it to be here. Let's take a look at your situation. Let's take a look at your credit reports with you. I don't think it's a sea change. I think a lot of this is already baked into the way that financial institutions deal with their members, the conversations that they have. I think it's just empowering the frontline people in a lot of cases to say, okay, let's try to get you to that place. Let's not just say no. Let's say, okay, it's just not right now. Let's talk about how we can get you there. And everybody in that situation wins. I know at BCU, we had people who were so happy to get certified as a financial coach because they don't like telling people no. They don't like doing those phone calls with people where they're like, how come I can't buy a house? How come I can't do this? They were so happy to be able to say, oh yeah, now I can say it, but let's take a look at this with you, and get you to that place where you can qualify for this thing that is a dream in your financial life. I think it's just empowering people with tools to help those they serve get where they want to be.
Yeah, for sure. Someone who maybe diagnoses that you can't get this particular loan yet, you might only be 30 points away from a threshold in your credit score where you could be approved. And so this is something that maybe could be handled over a fairly short amount of time if someone were to actually lay out the steps, as opposed to what you're saying in kind of that 1.0 world is, hey, Google it. How can I raise my credit score? 50,000 articles come back. They're all different take. I've got to intake them all, figure out what works for me, as opposed to just coming to a professional, say like you as a financial coach, and you say, listen, Pete, how about first things first? Why don't we get some of these small debt on your credit report paid off? Let's focus on some of those. And just having that, because to me, it's like, why do I hire a plumber? Because I don't necessarily want to become an expert in plumbing. I want my problems fixed. We hire that out a lot. And a financial coach can really shortcut and curate that information for people. My argument would be, as adding humans is one of the most expensive pieces of a business. I'm bringing on people with expertise and things like that. But I know you do a lot of consulting for credit unions. Obviously, you worked with credit unions or will contract to them. But what would you say to a credit union? Let's say I ran a credit union. Where credit unions have some limited resources. We don't have kind of the big, deep pockets as some of the banks out there are running a little thin sometimes. But what would you say? How can we start getting towards financial coaching or financial coaching like services without breaking the bank, with kind of working within what's realistic for us? What would you guide me towards as a leader in a credit union to be able to add some of these services that are really making change for people?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think that's one of the things that I pointed out in the white paper is that credit unions and banks, one of the things that they need to do is leverage the resources that they have and leverage those most efficiently. Like at BCU, we didn't bring on anybody extra when we started the financial coaching program. It was basically just people that we already had, getting them certified. And there is a little bit of a cost with going through the certification process and getting people to take the exam and those kind of things. But in the big picture, that's pretty small. And another thing I'll point out too is a lot of the employees, I know credit unions, a lot of times for the front line employees, it can feel like there's not a lot of opportunity to prove themselves. They feel like they're stuck maybe at a lower level. There's so many people who want to take it to the next level. And that was really something where getting their coaching certification was really attractive for a lot of people, because we said, okay, now that you're certified, put this on your LinkedIn, put these new skills that you have, use this to boost your career. From that perspective, the frontline employees, it's a bonus for them. But yeah, there's not really a lot of extra expense there to just get people certified and to add this whole new service that you can. That's another thing, to be able to go out there and you can advertise in the community and say, hey, we've got this new service. We are really, this mission statement that we put out there, that we want to empower people, we want to help people, we want to serve our community, we want to uplift. Well, we're being true to that. We're putting resources behind this. And hey, we have this great new service. And who knows, there's people who may not have otherwise reached out, but you can use this even as a way to get new members, to get new people involved, or people maybe who just had a checking account. You can deepen your relationship with them, get them more products. So I think in terms of the amount of investment that needs to go into creating this program versus what comes out of that on the end, also including just like, think of the relationship win that you're creating with this person when you're helping them in this way that just feels so above and beyond. And that's what I think is lacking so often for people. I'm not against technology. I'm not against AI, but there is just something different about having someone on your side and knowing that there's Julie over at the credit union who I can always call. And if I got a question, I know that she's there for me. I have background in marketing as well. And we always wanted those great stories to tell. It's one thing to say that you do this, say that you do that. But if you can say, oh, this is Bob, who lives one town over from you. We helped him do this and this, and you tell that story that way, that's just such a huge win as well.
Now, did AI threaten you to say that you have nothing against AI? Do they have your family or something?
That's why I want to say I'm not against AI. I don't know
on the record.
I don't know who's watching or listening right now, but no, I definitely think there's applications for it, but it's just, I've done research into it, and AI is still doing what's called hallucinating, which is generating answers that just are completely off the wall, out of left field. And when we're talking about financial wellness, you can't have that happening. You can't have an AI telling somebody to put every last cent they have into crypto, and who knows what kind of advice they're going to be getting from that. I've heard long ago that I really believe in, which is people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. And I think it's just so different to have somebody on your side and somebody who is certified and trained and just cares. And I think there's an assumption that people just want, oh, we want it quick, we want it fast, we want the latest technology. Yeah, for certain things. But then I think for something as personal and as vulnerable as our finances, it can really help to talk to someone who cares about you.
And I think back to what you were talking about, one of the reasons I don't think AI will replace coaching is it's not always just about having the right answer, but like you said, doing something for the approval of someone that I care about or I respect, right? Because if I told you that I wanted to do something and you gave me an assignment, I want to please you. I want to make sure that you're happy with my work. I want to make sure that I get that done for you. But if we don't have that kind of rapport and that relationship, then, what do I care? If I've got a financial coach that I don't feel like cares about me, what do I care about reaching my goal if I don't care about impressing them or if I don't care about being accountable to them? I think even without the training, it's just more about this is someone that I respect and have some sort of connection with, and I would do more for them than I probably would for myself in many cases.
Yeah. A lot of people are motivated by external factors.
So let me put you on the spot here. Let's get down to some brass taxes here. Let's say I run a credit union. I'm like, yeah, okay, Buck, you've made a great case for having more human interaction. That's what we talk about, especially in the credit union space. The credit union industry talks a lot about kind of more of the personalized approach to everything that they do. So I don't think this is something that's hard for them to get their head around. But if they were to say, listen, Buck, I've got a financial education program. We've got a financial literacy program we subscribe to. It's not cheap. It's 5 figures, 6 figures, depending on how many members you've got. It can be pretty pricey. Should I jettison that to make some tools available for training or whatever to level up some of my member experience people to become financial coaches, to start thinking more beyond the here and now, the long term? Well, how should I deploy my resources? Because limited amount of resources is a legit thing. Does that make sense? Because I'm going to lose that checklist item then. I'm going to lose, hey, we've got financial literacy resources here, but now I have 1, 2, 3 financial coaches here that are also certified. How would you realistically prefer to deploy resources in an environment like that?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think my personal opinion, based on the research I've done, is that the coaching needs to be the core of what you offer. I don't think it necessarily has to be the only thing, but I think you start with that and then you build around that. I'm not anti-technology, so one of the things I'm really interested in, depending on who's out there in the world listening to this, I'd love to build something where it integrates the coaching with technology. Like we talked about, there's goals that you have that you want to achieve by, let's say you work with a coach, they give you an action plan. Here's what you should be achieving by 1 month. I'd love for there to be an app where it reminds you, okay, you only have 2 weeks left before this. So I think you can certainly, there's a role for technology in that, but if it were my money, if I'm the CEO or if I'm the person running the education program, I have coaching at the core because that's proved to work. And then it also depends on what kind of service population you have. Like we were talking about with some of the credit unions that have larger segs, like Fortune 500 segs. They may want to have people out there doing workshops for those segs, or they may want to have other tools that they can offer to drive engagement with those segs. But I would say, yeah, start off with coaching, see how many of your goals that you have as a credit union, as a bank, how many of those goals can you achieve just through coaching, and do that first, carve out your budget first, and then really see what you're getting out of the rest of the tools that you have. Is there a lot of return on what you're putting into those? I'm not saying there isn't, but I think I would, if it were me, I would put my money where the results are, where it's generating behavior change for people, legitimate behavior change.
Yeah. And I would say, what is unique? A coach working with one person, that is always going to be unique, like a fingerprint, but putting out an article about how to budget or the 50-30-20 rule is not unique. There are many people and organizations who have written about the same thing. So I don't know if that differentiates like it used to. Maybe 10, 15, 20 years ago, that was something new as opposed to just having a retirement plan, maybe having an education hub. But like you said, now that we've seen that those kind of just exist, they kind of languish out there. They can be very expensive and they're not necessarily a game changer for the companies that are offering them or the people that are supposed to be using them. I think that's a pretty big revelation that now we can really focus on the people side of it. Not a lot of credit unions are very big. Maybe time capsule back a little bit from your white paper, because your white paper is definitely kind of more about like how to optimize, how to deploy, be strategic about this. But for a lot of credit unions, they're trying to get their head around financial wellness a little bit. What would be the first things you would do for kind of some of the smaller, more traditional credit unions that, yes, they buy into the idea. We want our people to be healthy, happy, financially fit. What would you, Buck, say as a consultant, come in and coach them to do to move forward and to be in the space? Because I think that's something that credit unions really struggle with. They don't want to be left out, right? They see what other credit unions are doing in digital or whatever it might be. They want access to this, but so many, I think, are just trying to figure out financial wellness in-house. And here we have someone like you who has not been in the financial wellness space itself, but also deep in the credit union space. So you know the lay of the land and how to plug in and build systems and programs for credit unions. So what would you do for some of these that are just starting out so that they could make the most and get out of the gate fast without necessarily having to learn all the hard lessons the same way we did back in the 2000s when we were kind of starting out on these programs? You were 2008. I officially switched over financial wellness in 2010. So kind of right at the very beginning, I think, of like this industry. And so we learned all these lessons the hard way. What would you do to get people and credit unions up and running?
Yeah, one of the things I would be interested in, just random credit union out there, I would say, what are you seeing? You have access to people's account information. You see how many people are overdrafting their accounts. You can pull credit scores for people. You have all this information. You have all this data. And I think so often we think of just the results. We don't think of the causes. And I think if I was just starting off a journey in financial wellness, I think I would want to get some data and just see what are people struggling with? What kind of problems are people having? And then I think, of course, I'm an advocate for coaching, but I would say if you can also look at the personal financial level, we want to talk about what people's goals are. But as a credit union, let's talk about what your organizational goals are. And even if it's something like we talked about earlier, you just want to make more loans. Okay, how does that happen? It could happen through getting new members, or it can happen through increasing the financial wellness of your current member base. That's why I think it all starts there, is what are you up against? What do you want to help people achieve? And then I think that kind of what you want to do with financial wellness after that, I think just naturally flows from that. In the white paper, it's going to be really tough for credit unions to compete with the huge players on the tech side of things. Having the fanciest AI, having the fanciest tools, again, that's where the people come into play. And so if I was just starting off with the program at a credit union, I would survey my frontline employees. What are you hearing from people? What would you like? How would you like to better be able to help people with the problems that they're coming to you with? What are you hearing? What are you seeing? Because if you're going to do financial coaching and it's going to be the frontline people, they have to be excited about it. They have to see the value there. You have to get them pumped up about this. There's so many things that they could do with it. And they'll continue coming back to you with ideas like, oh, what if we did this in the appointments that we have people? And what if there's such a wealth of information in those positions, and because they deal with people so much. So I would say, get some data on your members, get some information from your employees, and then just build off of that. I'm not advocating anybody do something dramatically different, because I know that the expense and just the total outlay of resource and time to do something like that would be way too intense. But I would say just build off what you already know and craft your program to try to solve some of those things that are already out there.
Absolutely. And I think when there are so many resources out there, I would just encourage credit unions, who are usually very open to reaching out to other credit unions, but to reach out to some of the people like you. And I don't know, I'm not sure if you'd be willing to have a conversation with some of the people that are promoting this, talk about that and see where that goes. But I think being able to pick your brain specifically, we talked about the benefit of coaching to an individual, but to have someone like you coaching a credit union, understanding what their customers like and the size of their business, I think would be super valuable as well. Anything else in this white paper? Obviously, it's up on LinkedIn. People can go check it out. But anything else that you wanted to mention about this? Any kind of final thoughts about what you saw as you were researching this and getting this out there for people?
Yeah, one thing I would like to add is I think it's important to understand that there isn't any one certification process that I recommend. There's a few different ones that credit unions typically do. But one thing I would say is that it's important to understand that just getting people certified doesn't give you a financial coaching program. There is another step that needs to happen there. You need to bring in somebody who has experience building a coaching program, because there are some particulars about actually conducting these appointments that you want to take into account. It's a very sensitive topic for a lot of people. And I think you really want your coaches to be able to handle those different situations. One of the things that I did at BCU is we had this role-playing session. We had a series of 3 workshops, 2-hour workshops each, to get people up to speed on actually doing appointments. And we would role-play some different scenarios, because having been a counselor myself, financial coach myself, I can tell you some weird stuff will come up and you get questions that you never thought were going to happen. One thing I would say is just understand that it's important to bring in someone who has experience with those kind of dynamics and what it actually means to do an appointment, and not just turning people over and saying, oh, they have the knowledge now, just go talk to people. I think it's important to be careful and considerate about that part of the process too.
Yeah, no, it's funny you mentioned that, because I got into financial wellness and we were working on financial coaching. There really weren't any financial coaching certifications. There were some other ones like on life coaching and some health coaching ones that we kind of started with, but there wasn't really a robust industry. But I had been a financial advisor for 5 or 6 years at that point. I had licenses. And then we get into financial coaching. We're thinking about the do's and the don'ts and goal setting and trying to tap into motivation and all of these other things, all this nuance that you're trying to balance. Despite how much experience I had already in the industry up to that point, I remember going to my first real coaching appointment and being petrified, really nervous Am I going to screw this up? Am I overthinking it? Am I going to say the wrong thing? What are the bounds? So it's like you said, not even just about reading the books. You can read the coaching books. You can take the certifications. For the people who have been there and done that, just a few moments of some of their insights, I think, will make it so much easier, not be robotic. So you're really more of an art than a science in many ways, but
For sure.
especially for what we do. I totally agree. This has been great. Buck, I know I picked your brain about this. I saw the white paper. I was just intrigued because I can just say my experiences are exactly the same as what you have found data-wise. Like I said, so many people try to intuit this space and kind of race towards where they think there will be help and doesn't necessarily get the outcomes they want. I think both for you and me, we want to help as many people as we can in as efficient manner as we can. If you see yourself having some of these issues in your organization or your credit union, your bank, your financial institution, please feel free to reach out to me or Buck and be happy to help you out. Buck, I would love for you to come back on because we have so many different topics around financial wellness that I would love to pick your brain on. The industry, the economy kind of changing, AI on the horizon, and all these other things. Have you back on again and just kind of kick around some more thoughts if you're willing.
Absolutely. I'd love to be back.
I appreciate it. Thank you so much, my friend. More to come.
Yeah, for sure.